So we are kind of reinventing stuff and how things should be done, how to make a building more efficient, how to reuse all that waste energy in a building, reclaim all that water for reuse, and just try to bring down the decarbonization as much as possible. So it's always keeping us on our toes. We're kind of trying to be champions in that department and try to lead the way for the other engineering companies and other clients.
Hey everyone, thanks for listening to another episode of Buildings 2.0. Today I'm speaking with Kevin Morrisroe, associate at Buro Happold. Kevin, thanks for chatting with me today.
Nice to meet you, Jose. Thanks for having me on.
Take us back. So before you were an engineer, an associate at Buro Happold, what's the story? What got you excited? And even before education, what were you working on? What got you excited?
Yeah, well, I guess I will go back to kind of the start of engineering. You might know from the accent, I'm originally from Ireland. And so I studied civil engineering in the National University of Galway in Ireland. And then, like most Irish people, had itchy feet to leave the country and explore the world. So after spending a summer in New York City, I decided that that's where I wanted to be and start my engineering career there. And so I had a good friend over here, Brian Henry, who said, yeah, come work with our company. And he was working for a contractor in plumbing and fire protection, and they were looking for a project manager. So I was like, why not? Let's give it a shot. So then once I came over to New York City and just the vast size of these buildings, knowing the ins and the outs of how they work. And then I was there for 3 years, really enjoyed it. But then I kind of wanted to throw my hat into the design side of things. So I was fortunate enough to get a job with Buro Happold after searching around the industry for a while. Got in here, loved it, loved what they were doing, the vast quality of the work they were doing. It was incredible. Really got me energized to do some good engineering. And 8 years later, I'm still here, still loving it, and still doing really cool things here.
That's exciting. Engineering is a broad umbrella. Help us understand what keeps you busy, from the mechanical systems within a building, electrical systems, fire sprinkler systems, et cetera. What are some of the challenges you're facing, and perhaps maybe projects, and what kind of scales and challenges you're facing?
Well, in New York City, the scale of the buildings is always challenging, as everything is just keep going up higher and bigger and better. And now, like using the past, used to be very straightforward. We used to use a lot of gas boilers to heat the systems. But now with, if you're aware, local law 97 and decarbonization and all these playbooks that New York City have in place, coming to challenge, we're trying to turn the needle a little, going towards all electrical buildings here, which is we're mainly focused on. We don't do any really fossil fuel projects anymore, but it's a pretty new area for a lot of people. So we are kind of reinventing stuff and how things should be done, how to make a building more efficient, how to reuse all that waste energy in a building, reclaim all that water for reuse, and just try to bring down the decarbonization as much as possible. So it's always keeping us on our toes. We're kind of trying to be champions in that department and try to lead the way for the other engineering companies and other clients.
Help me understand this. So at this point, sustainability has become table stakes. I can't imagine a world where a designer or engineer would say, well, I want to design an unsustainable building. But I mean, an example of what's success in sustainability? How can we think about it? What decisions are made within a sustainable project versus, say, someone who's not considering this? Give us some practical ways an engineer thinks about this.
So it's first you got to get the client to come on board with your design. And that's usually what we have in the concept stage. We tell them what we want to do. But a lot of the times the client is just looking at dollar signs and wondering how can they save money down the line. Maybe there might be a more expensive upfront cost, but we have done studies to show after a while these costs will come lower and lower, and basically it'll pay for itself, even though the upfront cost is a little heavier as well. We're lucky to live in a city that is the same line of thinking that we do when it comes to sustainability. They have lots of programs in place here. So if we're designing these fully electric sustainable buildings, and the client is going to get a few kickbacks as well, and a few funding, like NYSERDA funding, and also not going to get charged fines with local law 97. So they're kind of the practical things that we think of. I don't know, Jose, if I answered that question right, but yeah, along those lines.
It's super helpful. I mean, what goes into, you mentioned an all electrical building. What does that mean for an owner?
It would mean no burning of fossil fuels whatsoever. So, like historically, we would heat a building using boilers or steam. Same with like all the water, would be using boilers or steam. So, what we do now, we've taken away that. But the challenges we face now is that the electrical capacity of the building must be a lot larger. The electrical load coming into the building is going to be a lot larger. But so the main thing is putting all these buildings on the grid as opposed to the gas grid now onto the electrical grid. And then once all these buildings are on the electrical grid, the city and other utility companies are looking how to clean up the grid in turn. So all around using renewable energy, making just low emissions all around, pretty much.
I'm curious, if I'm an owner of, say, a Class B or Class C building, can you give me a sense as to like, what does this investment look like to go from where my building is today, likely burning fossil fuels, boilers, et cetera, and gas, to going all electric? What does that mean in terms of time, investment? How can I begin to think about this transition?
Well, first we do a lot of this like NYSERDA funding with the Empire State Realty Trust, which is like the Empire State Building and all those buildings that they own. And we've developed a playbook with those guys. And how that looks is like we break it down into phases. We look at like things you can change out. Maybe it's like a simple thing like swapping out your windows for more, like instead of single pane glass, you go to triple glazed windows, more sustainable, better for the envelope. And then you would just phase, okay, so what's next? Okay, I see you have steam boilers here. Let's swap them out for electrical heat pumps. Let's take some heat from outside, use it to pump it inside. Simple things like that. And then through the NYSERDA, they will give you funding. So they might give you funding for maybe 60, 70, 80% of that. So it brings down the capital cost and, it makes it more lucrative. It's also good, like you mentioned, a Class B building. If you want to bring tenants on board, it's a good marketing side strategy for those. All companies now are looking at their ESG. And if they're moving into a very sustainable passive building, that looks good. People want to work there and then get better talent coming on board.
That's a good point. I mean, what does it mean for tenants and occupants? So one thing is like the investment that, as a landlord, I would have to make. But as an incoming tenant, whether it's maybe a commercial office space of some sort, what are some of the benefits that the occupiers see?
Yes, knowing the fact that you're working in a sustainable building that has maybe it's like LEED Gold and people want to like work at these type of buildings, that by coming into the office, you're not forcing the building to burn all these fossil fuels, but more emissions out into the air. And yeah, I just feel good that you're making a difference by working with a company that is, providing like not just going to the cheapest guy, but the most sustainable guy
right
on the street, So
right.
It's kind of like a feel-good thing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Do you find that there's still any kinds of objections? Like, is there a reason why someone would not want to move ahead? Is it typically because of money, or do you hear other kind of common objections to like going all electric?
It boils down to cost mainly. That is the main thing we hear. People have been and also there is a learning curve for people who've been dealing with gas for the last number of years, and now they're switching to a totally new design. So there is you got to upskill all your employees. So there is a little pushback on those sides of things.
Yeah. Is there maybe a sweet spot? Like, are you finding a trend in, say, like Class A versus Class B, or do you just kind of, you're generally saying all over? And you mentioned Local Law 97 and other kind of initiatives from the city to push this. Do you see that there's certain types of buildings rushing to upgrade before others, or?
I mean, right now we're seeing a lot of Class B, and like I said, it is a marketing thing as well. Just the way things have gone, not many people are renting office space these days. So the competition is heavy out there for these Class B buildings and trying to attract tenants. You see some Class B buildings that are lying empty right now. So the more amenities and the more, bells and whistles they can offer tenants, is the more likely that they might have a full building, as opposed to someone who's not doing any of these things, that's still running gas, still burning fossil fuels. Maybe that's a place where a tenant wouldn't want to move in.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. The maybe to zoom out for a second, help me understand like the gravity or the scope of what's happening across just even New York City. How do we move the commercial real estate industry to transition en masse? Typically, I have to imagine that it's a concerted effort between the city, financing strategies, the design and construction community coming together. But there's a lot of buildings in New York. I mean, what needs to be true in order for us to be able to kind of transition en masse, not just kind of on a one by one basis. At least if the goal here is to kind of go to net zero within a certain reasonable amount of time.
Mm-hmm. Well, the way New York City is treating this is they're kind of hitting them financially. That, hey, if your building is not meeting this emission goal, you're going to get fined. The more emissions you put out, the more fines you have to pay, the larger the fines you have to pay. So it's kind of hitting them in the wallet. And unfortunately, that's the most successful way of doing it. People are not just going to do it to feel all warm and fuzzy inside, but if they see it financially hitting them hard, then they're going to start making moves.
Yeah. So just to kind of continue on the thread of like me as a commercial landlord of a Class B building, what's the first step? I mean, is it just a matter of going to rounding up a series of floor plans that I have and maybe some utility bills and talking to an engineer? How do I even begin to think about the kind of A to Z process to transition a building?
Right. So I guess the first, especially if you're worried financially, the first thing you got to do is take a look at where you're at right now. And then there's a lot we can help. Any company like ourselves can help you look at how much emissions you're burning now, what that will look like in the next 5 years with fines, what it's going to look like in the next 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. Is the financial implications, are they going to hurt you? Is it a change that you want to make? If yes, let's look at the feasibility of what we can do in your building. And that's when we get our hands dirty. We go out inside, we go through all the equipment that's been in there, sometimes 50, 60 years, see how we can improve that. And then what incentives can you get from it? And then how will it turn that dial down about how many fines you pay? And then depending on what that owner's goal is the amount they want to change in the building, whether it's swapping out all the windows, as I mentioned, taking away all gas boilers, reusing all the waste heat for reheat, stuff like that. And it's just like, we can go as far as you want, but obviously there is an upfront cost at stake. So you got to find that sweet spot is like how much less fines you want to pay versus how much you want to pay right now. And so you got to kind of put your future hat on and just make a decision that way. Then once you've made that decision, that's when we start making the changes. We start providing the drawings, getting out to bid. This is like swapping out A, B, and C for E and F, and then we just get to work. And it doesn't all have to happen at once. Like I said, it can happen in phases, one small step at a time.
Right. That makes sense. I imagine the answer is it depends. But if, say, budget was a challenge, what have you found has been like the highest return on investment? Is it, and I'm thinking quite literally of like the building's DNA, right? The windows, HVAC systems, boilers. How do you think about the effort in terms of prioritization and like what has the highest return on investment? If, say, I don't have the funds today to just completely revamp the building, how can I think about prioritization as I kind of transition, perhaps in multi-phases?
Yeah, well, by far the biggest return on investment is the heating of the building. But it is an upfront cost, but there is a lot of funding out there. But it does depend on the size of the building and how big of that heating is. You might have like 3 or 4 different stages of heating phases throughout the building. So it depends on the size of the building. Windows could cost a lot more than, swapping out a steam boiler. But it does depend. But there's if you're just a small residential place, then definitely swapping out a boiler is definitely going to be your biggest return on investment right there.
Playing out the scenario, so as we transition more and more and more buildings, earlier when we were chatting, you mentioned smart buildings, and it has become a bit of a buzzword, but I'm curious, how do you think about smart buildings? Why does it matter? What does it actually mean? And how might it impact your kind of day-to-day workflow?
So what we've seen typically in the past, and these buildings that we were looking at and trying to improve, is that a lot of the equipment and everything has been oversized because they've broken down how much services you need per each floor. But a smart building to me is maybe putting meters on each floor and actually finding out exactly what they're using, as opposed to what's on the design drawings of what they're capable of using. We're not looking at peak loads, we're actually looking at average loads. So I say for a Class B building, a tenant moves in, it needs all these services. If you look at the design drawings, oh no, we're maxed out. But if you have a smart building, now you know how much capacity you actually have in the building. maybe so what you're giving one floor, maybe you can turn down that and give it to another floor. So to me, it's just like understanding like the maintenance team, how their building works and what they can give to tenants and how much people are actually using, and maybe, swap out something that's oversized for something smaller and more realistic.
Yeah. I've got a real estate team. I know about things like BIM and IoT, but how can I navigate this ecosystem of different tools and software to get to a smart building? Like how do I make that leap? Who should I work with, and what should I know? Because at the end of the day, I'm not necessarily a designer, right? But I own buildings, and I know of the different ingredients. I just might not know how to put it together. How do we even begin to think about this?
So a lot of companies have a smart design team. I know we have one here in Buro Happold, like some of the contractor size, and they will help you out as well. So the first thing is probably just to bring them on board, have a meeting with them saying, hey, I have this building. What steps do I need to take to make it smart? They may say it's not possible. It's as smart as it's going to get. Or you'll have like someone, maybe this is a good case study for turning this into a smart building. But I'm not on the smart buildings team myself, so I don't know the breakdown of what happens step by step, but I know there are people out there to help you.
Yeah, I think as I navigate the whole design process, that's something I think owners in particular just start asking. It's like how do I even break into this space? But it's definitely good to know. I think the Buro Happold team, I think it's got that team already in place. Are there other emerging trends or technology or software that like has profoundly changed your day-to-day, whether it's hardware, software, new processes?
What we're seeing a lot, and I think it's going to be the next big talking point. It started off with fossil fuels, but now I think it's going to work its way into water reclaim. And water rates in New York City are like pretty low right now, but they're definitely going to start rising up through the years. And you can already see that the DOB have started putting out pilot grant programs for water reclaim systems. Based on how much water you get a year, they will cover a lot of that cost for a system. We're going to see, and we've started seeing a lot of it now, is rainwater being reused, used for toilet flushing, irrigation, cooling tower makeup, grey water. We've seen a lot of that too. Hand washing, showers, taking that, treating it, using it, putting it back into the building for, again, toilet flushing. And if you want to go even further, you could even look at black water treatment on site for reuse. So I feel like that is definitely an upcoming trend that we're going to see a lot more. Unfortunately, like water is pretty much near its tipping point as it comes to like how much clean water is actually available out there. So that's something we've started to develop. We're starting a lot more companies coming with products. Every week we get a call like saying that this new innovation of how they're treating rainwater treatment and grey water treatment, and it's just trying to keep ahead of the curve on that one and be the innovators and be the guys that are doing this first, and eventually be known for that as well. So we're seeing that. We've been working it in to a lot of projects. It's difficult to portray this to clients right now. You kind of have to hold their hand with them a lot and like kind of point them to what this is going to look like in the future. Like you're using millions and millions of gallons of water a year. The rates are low right now, but it's going to be a significant cost in the future.
And from my understanding, why are those rates expected to increase?
Just because the lack of clean water out there. The whole, like, all of our water comes from Croton Falls, upstate New York. The demand just keeps getting higher and higher. You see massive, like you look over at Hudson Yards there, and all these massive buildings are coming up. The amount of clean water they're going to be using keeps getting higher and higher. Puts a serious demand on the infrastructure. And then, like, over the years, we've seen in the summers a lot of floods in New York City, especially out in Long Island City and some of the boroughs in Brooklyn, a lot of floods. So if we can, stop all that storm water and wastewater, instead of going to the street in a flood scenario, reusing it, keeping it on site, treating it, pumping it back in, and just keeping it in a closed loop in the building. And it would reduce a lot of that. It would take a lot of the heat off that infrastructure that's already way, way undersized for the amount of people that are in New York City right now.
That's, honestly, that's something I never even considered. So you mentioned reclaiming water. You mentioned some of the returns on investment on just addressing heating. What other major topics that I, as a landlord, need to make sure that I'm thinking about?
Those are the big ones right Now that I can think of top of my head, heating of hot water is also another big thing. Like, so if you're thinking if like a lot of these buildings have these like big IT server rooms, for all the security, fire alarm, computer services, all that in the building. There's a lot of cooling that's required for that. So what we're using a lot is like taking that cooling, your cold water comes in, it cools the room, and you got hot water coming out, usually goes to the cooling tower and just like releases the atmosphere. And then side by side, you got this hot water demand. Maybe there's like a pile of showers in this building, maybe half of it's residential, that need hot water throughout. So we're seeing a lot of taking that waste heat, using it to preheat or domestic hot water, like via heat exchangers, like completely potable, and then pumping that into all your showers. And so you're not wasting energy heating up that water. You've already got a head start on it. And also you're taking away from all that waste heat that's otherwise just go into the atmosphere. Yeah. So we're doing a lot of that as well.
That's fascinating. Maybe to transition, you mentioned in the early part of your career, you moved to New York City and you were kind of dumbfounded by the city and its scale. You've now been in engineering for several years. What would Kevin of today tell younger Kevin as he started in engineering much later? What have you learned, or maybe what were things that you realized were maybe not true, or what's changed?
I would definitely tell a younger Kevin that maybe this is less about engineering and more about personal growth. Take a step back for a minute, count your blessings. If you mess up, you know what? It's not the end of the world. Believe it or not, if you mess up on a drawing or a calculation, the building more than likely will still get built. Work-life balance is very important for your mental health. So these are all things that I've taken a while to learn, but I think I've gotten there in the end. And that so New York City is such like a fast-paced, quick-moving city, and sometimes you just gotta stop and slow down and reassess, and not get all caught up in it. Sometimes these large buildings can be overwhelming, just breaking it down piece by piece.
Yeah. The industry itself, engineering, and I'd argue just kind of the broader design community in general, can't help but to bring up the role of AI and how it's evolving. Certainly, a lot of the early kind of conceptualization or design efforts. Do you see some of the basic value propositions of engineering as an industry evolving because of AI, or how do you think about that?
Yeah, personally, I think there's a lot of potential there. Still very, very new. I'm not going to use AI to design structural calculations for a building right now, but I can use it for some of the soft skills, and give me more time to work on the calculations and the fun part of engineering myself. Still relatively new, still got to be kind of wary of it, kind of be careful of it, but as long as we use it, safely and with the, and not trying to cut corners more but as something that will help you along the way, I definitely think there is a lot of potential there in its use.
Yeah. I mean, there's real consequence of getting this thing wrong. So I do trust it's probably going to take some time before we fully start to kind of embrace it. I'm curious, what in your day-to-day are some of the low-hanging fruits that you think, your experience, your skill combined with AI could actually move the needle faster? Because I imagine there's kind of different phases, different parts. You mentioned probably not trusting it for deep, important calculations. Are there other kind of day-to-day stuff that you actually found useful?
Yeah, there definitely is, right? I know, in the same with architects, is it so many codes and books and standards that you have to flick through, and it's hard to know where to start. So a lot of the times I would just use it for hey, where is the code section about this? And then it will just save me it probably saves me 20 minutes of flicking through pages, and it's oh, here it is. Oh, of course. Stuff like that, I'm not going to say, hey, asking code questions to it yet. I like to use it hey, point me to the direction of where this code section lives. Is one of the day-to-day tools that I think is very safe, as long as you're not asking them for answers, just having it point you the way. Other stuff like that. Report writing can sometimes be helpful, checking your grammar, stuff like that. Simple soft skills. I try not to rely on it too much, but it can definitely be a helping hand if you don't, have a buddy. A lot of time we're working remotely these days. If you don't have a buddy sitting next to you just to bounce some questions off, then maybe that's where it can come in handy.
Right. 5 years from now, you've mentioned, regulatory advancements and legislation, and and just kind of core design principles shifting and some of the priorities that a landlord has to think about as they transition to an electric building. 5 years from now, is there a project maybe today that you think is on track to be a success story? And we look back and, a few years from now and start to identify what are those success stories and what's likely, the world going to look like in 5-10 years?
Yeah, I mean, there's plenty that we're working on right now, all under an NDA, unfortunately, but there's some ones that I'm really excited about. Some of the stuff we're doing, and like we have a great mechanical team, especially over here, and what they're doing is just like blowing my mind on how like they're just so much recovering so much energy that would otherwise be wasted, and then also giving some energy to like the plumbing side as well. And it's just like everything is just so connected and every little part is so thought through. And like one in my head that I'm in particular thinking of, and it will be a building in Manhattan in the next 5 or 6 years, and it's just like super exciting. And it feels like here we're like setting the limit of how these buildings should be built in the future. Yeah, we've just an incredible team here that are doing some very exciting things.
That's so exciting. Kevin, I wanted to thank you. I think you've highlighted a lot and got me certainly really excited about where I think real estate market is going. I think where buildings are going. And so I can't help but to get really excited about some of the projects you're working on. If folks wanted to follow you, where can they follow you and learn a little bit more about what you're working on?
Yeah, the best way just to hit me up on LinkedIn. Just Kevin Morrisroe. There's not too many of us out there, so it should be easy to find. Happy if anyone to reach out if we can chat for sure.
Awesome. Well, Kevin, thanks for joining in, and excited to do another session.
Thanks, Jose.